This is the studio where I record all of my YouTube videos, and believe it or not, I've actually been in this space for an entire year as of this week, and quite a lot has changed since I moved in a whole year ago. So I thought it was about time I did an anniversary studio update. But first, just to put things into context, let's have a look at the outside. So this is a local office development, if you like. It actually belongs to a friend of mine who used to be my employer, believe it or not, about 15 years ago when I used to have a real job. I worked for a local IT business that was actually based on this very site, and indeed he owns all of these buildings and rents them out to various local businesses. And back in September 2023 I approached him about an empty office here that had been empty for about a year. There was a small business in here and they'd moved on to other places, and I had this vision of using the space for sorting out my stuff, maybe doing some eBay sales, potentially doing a bit of filming here as well as I was fixing stuff up. And this is a photo that I actually took the last week of September 2023 when I first got in to have the tour of the place. So this is the actual studio space itself. And this is what it looks like now. Yeah, quite a bit different, isn't it? And I appreciate it's an ever so slightly different camera angle, and there is actually quite an interesting story behind that. There was quite a bit of upheaval that involved some quite major changes partway through the year, which I will talk about in a moment. But for now, let's take a look at this side of the studio, the bit that you don't get to see on camera. Welcome to what I like to call the workshop, the area where I work on future video ideas, testing stuff, and of course it's completely separate to the main studio part where I actually film things, which is incredibly useful because it means I can have slightly longer running projects and experiments and things happening on this desk while I'm recording stuff over in the main studio. And one really good example of that is still here. So this is the Mac Mini with the eGPU, and all the testing and stuff that I talked about in that video, the tweaking with Linux and testing various different GPUs and different PCIe adapters and things. That was all actually done at this desk while I was still in the process of recording stuff. So really, really useful. So much more useful than my old space at home where, of course, I was doing everything on the same desk. And if I was working on something that ended up being a bit longer running, it held absolutely everything up. So that's one of the benefits of having this studio space. But before we get into the details of the workshop, I should probably start at the very beginning and talk about the window display, because that was one of the very first things to go in when I moved into the studio. And the whole reason for this was just I needed to come up with something for some kind of privacy. There are other businesses that are based on this site that I mentioned earlier, and all right, there's no public access to the site, there's no passing traffic or anything like that, but I wanted some kind of divider. I came up with a few different ideas for curtains and things like that, but I decided to kill two birds with one stone really and come up with this storage/display solution here. And this has actually turned out to be one of the best assets of this studio, I think, because of course it's really eye-catching. It brings a lot of attention to the channel, and yeah, even the landlord himself, when he has friends and family and potential new tenants and people coming over, he gives them the tour, and indeed I have actually ended up bringing people in here and giving them the full studio tour as well off the back of that. So it's a really good thing for the channel, you know, it brings lots of attention and it makes people smile, they like to see it. And I kitted all of that out with LED strip lighting, which is all on smart plugs. So this actually comes on first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening and just illuminates the whole display and kind of finishes the thing off. I also fitted some film to the door, so this is just complete 100% blackout film. At some point I did tell myself that I was going to put a logo or something on the front, but haven't quite got around to that yet. And the windows, I know there was quite a lot of concern early on about UV affecting the stuff in the window. The windows are all UV treated as well, and actually over the course of the 12 months that I've been here, there has been a lot of this stuff that hasn't moved at all and has been in the window the entire time, and I haven't seen any evidence of any kind of fading so far, so that's really great. Behind the shelves are these office divider panels, which I do think finish the space off quite nicely. They're also really good acoustically as well. They really do cut down on any kind of reverberation in here, which is really handy for filming. And finally, there is this curtain that I installed in the middle. So these are just some cheap blackout curtains from Amazon, and a curtain rail / curtain pole type system that I bought from a DIY place called Wix. And because, of course, this is rented and I don't really want to modify anything or drill too many holes in things if I can, that's all freestanding, that's all cable tied to the racking, and it's been in there for a whole year now, and it's actually worked out really well. It also helps with drafts and things as well in the winter, particularly. It can be quite cold in the window, but it's quite a nice thermal barrier between the window and the studio area as well. So that's the story behind the window display, but while we're here on the workshop side, there's actually still quite a bit more to have a look at and quite a bit more story behind all of this. So I mentioned earlier that you won't have seen this side of the studio on camera, and that's not actually strictly true. You see, this office is actually not really an office at all. It's a meeting room that's attached to a much bigger office next door, and originally this was all rented out as one single unit, of course, but I didn't need all of the space, and I also didn't want all of the expense of having to pay for a load of space that I wasn't using, so we came to an agreement where I would just have the meeting room. The trouble with that being that there was only a glass partition between this and the office, and the IT business did very occasionally use the office next door, so I decided I wanted some privacy, and I also wanted to do something that would look quite nice on camera. So I clad all of the glass partition between the two spaces using this wood flooring that we had in our garage. So there's a whole story behind this about a builder that messed up some plumbing in our house and ended up flooding the whole downstairs of the house. And this was the replacement flooring that they actually bought for us at the time, although we opted to not have it fitted at the time. And then years later, when we did finally get around to fitting some flooring, we changed our minds about what we wanted. So this was surplus to requirements, and I finally saw my opportunity to use it for something. So yeah, I've used it as cladding on this wall. It's not attached at all, much like most of the stuff in this studio, and that did lead to quite a big problem about a month later when it actually all started falling apart. And this is a supporter video that I put out in November of last year, where I was here all night at one point having to dismantle the entire thing and rebuild it just because some of the planks were warped, some of them were split, and they weren't slotted together properly, and the whole thing was just a huge catastrophe. But yeah, I learnt from that, and I also installed a curtain over the door, which proved to be incredibly useful because of what happened next. So I mentioned earlier that my landlord here also owned an IT business on site, and unbeknownst to me at the time, over the course of the 6 months that I'd been here, he was actually in the process of selling that business. He didn't mention it to me. In fact, he didn't mention it to anyone at all, really. And the first I knew of it was when the new owners showed up and they actually wanted to start using this office next door, which they actually rented from him, and they still do. And this caused a bit of a mad panic because I am actually here filming during the day reasonably often, and all of a sudden I had people right behind me, right behind where I was filming. So I had to very hastily build a replica of my set on the complete opposite side of the room where my original workshop area is. So I haven't actually shown this original workshop area yet, so we'll just have a look at some early footage of this. I don't really have a lot of footage of this area because I never really got into the swing of using it. In fact, I think the only project I actually did there was the wiring for the LED shelf lighting, but this is what it used to look like. And because the whole thing was done in such a rush, I didn't even record any of the build process for the new studio. So I have a couple of photos, and as you can probably see, I also lost one of my windows in the process because it actually ended up in front of one of the windows. Not that I used them really, I permanently had the blinds down anyway. But yeah, I now have 2 identical studio sets in this office. But that actually ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise because in the time that I'd been recording down this end, there were a few little niggly things that I wasn't 100% happy with, and also with the space and kind of the layout of the room, it wasn't really working for me. So I took that move as an opportunity to implement some of the ideas that I'd had, and I will show you some of those in a moment when we check out the studio area. But for now, without further ado, let's have a closer look at some of the stuff that I have down here in the workshop. So I think the best way to do this is going to be as a bit of a walk around tour using the wide angle lens, just so you get a feel for the lie of the land here. And this is the first thing I'm faced with as I come through the door when I arrive at the studio. So I have the choice of studio recording area on the right hand side and of course the workbench, workshop area on the left. And this is just a bit of a soundproofing, sound deadening curtain that I actually never use, and it's just kind of being stored there. And a coat hanger that, of course, if I have any long-running videos that I'm recording over the course of a few days, I can bring an extra t-shirt and I can make sure that I'm wearing the same t-shirt for the entire video, just for continuity's sake. So a bit of a peek behind the scenes there. This is what used to be known as the Ramble Desk. So if you're familiar with my weekly podcast, Reese Rambles, which goes out on a Friday night, a bit of a plug there. Of course, I used to record that at home, and then once I got the studio space, I moved it all over here. And this was permanently set up for recording those. So I had a bit of an arm setup with a camera mount on the top and lights mounted on the top, big monitor and all the rest of it. And it was quite a nice angle with all the studio stuff and stuff in the background. But I decided that it was a bit of a waste of space as stuff started to expand, and I actually moved that over to the main desk that I use for everything else, which of course I will talk about in a moment. And this desk kind of became surplus to requirements. So this has some ongoing video projects on it. The Sefucom, of course, that was the most recent video on my channel. That's done really well, actually. That's about to hit 100,000 views. So loads of interest in this machine. And I have also recently bought the software packs for this with those interesting cartridges and things, which are on their way to me from Japan. And it is also now working. I didn't get it working at the end of that video, but it is working now. So very, very keen to get on with this and get on with part 2. And speaking of part 2, or are we on to part 3 now? I can't even remember. There is the PC 9821 here as well, of course, a bit of an ongoing project. A very good friend of mine and a long-term supporter of the channel has been helping me out building a hard disk image for this. In fact, I was chatting to him about it just today. And he's run into some technical issues and things, as well as some job-related stuff that's kind of put that on hold very temporarily. But it is still an ongoing project. So just moving around a little bit, you will no doubt have noticed my arcade machine in the corner here. This is the VideoStar Mark II. And again, long-term viewers of the channel should be familiar with this because I have done a few videos on it before. I made a big commitment about 2 years ago to finally get this finished, and absolutely nothing has happened with it since then, other than A, moving it here to the studio, and B, stealing the PC that was inside it and turning that into a NAS that I use at home. So I'm going to put a Mister setup in this. I'm probably going to use Taki Udon's $99 DE10 clone as the basis for this. I just need to get around to finishing it off. It also needs some paintwork, as you can probably see, and now I've lost access to that office next door where I used to do all that kind of dirty stuff. That's going to be an outside job, so it's probably going to end up being a bit of a summer project now. We've already seen this shelving, of course, in this video. This is the original studio set. Just got some lighting and things stored on here that I don't really use, to be honest. Some spare CRTs, some future projects as well. We've got a Nintendo Wii there that needs an HDMI mod. Got some Xbox 360 games that I bought in bulk a couple of years ago for some bizarre reason. I think they worked out at about 80p each or something, and actually ended up not only being decent games, but all in really good condition and complete with manuals and things as well. So not quite sure what I'm going to do with those or why I even bought them, but that is often the case in this hobby, isn't it? Anyway, moving swiftly on from that, we have a Mac Pro down here, which was actually a very recent and a very kind donation to the channel from a long-term supporter and fan. You know who you are, so thank you ever so much for donating that. And of course, that will be featuring on the channel at some point in the future. Over on the desk here, we have 3 machines that have, of course, previously featured on the channel. There's the Atari VCS there. We've got the Mac Mini with the eGPU, as previously mentioned, and my lovely RM486 DX4100, which I really need to do something else with because this is probably my favourite machine in my collection and it just doesn't get enough love. And next to that, you can probably see some of my MIDI devices, my sound canvas and stuff, because this machine has the Orpheus sound card in it. That's hooked up to all of the MIDI gear. And next to that was a bit of a project that never really went anywhere. So this is some Sony stuff, but I'll keep that one under wraps for now because you never know. These shelves in the middle serve 2 purposes, of course, one of them being storage and the other one being to divide the room into 2 kind of very distinct zones, I guess. They also act as soundproofing, I should probably mention, just between the studio side and this side, because as previously mentioned, there are people quite often having meetings in the office behind me. And these really useful boxes on the top shelf hashtag not sponsored, are the ones that you probably remember if you saw my initial videos when I was moving into the studio. These are the boxes that were in the garage, in the loft, in the spare bedroom, all over the place that I moved over and that I promised I would sort out and do a proper inventory of. And yeah, I haven't touched them since. They were part of kind of the room divider in the middle of the room at one point, and then at some point I got some more shelving and they ended up being moved to the top shelf and never spoken of again. And here I've tried to be a bit organised here. I actually brought all of these from home, so yeah, this is where I keep all of my little bits and pieces and things. We've got recordable media and floppy disks and things being stored down there. Random cards, including all of those GPUs that I bought for the Mac Mini. And we have tools. We've got the Moo gun and the oscilloscope and stuff like that on this side. So let's go check out the studio side next. And finally, welcome to the studio set itself, where all the magic happens on my channel. And if you're a regular viewer, this is, of course, a setup that you will no doubt be familiar with. Got the standing desk, got the backdrop and everything else. And I must say, I am really, really happy with how I finally managed to get all of this set up. But of course, this is a behind the scenes video, so we will switch to a wider angle behind the scenes camera, and hopefully this helps to put into context how this actually fits in with everything else. Now, the main problem I have in here, and in fact the reason I've recorded all of this on my phone this time around, is lighting. You can see the sheer amount of lighting I have here. So I've got 3 LED panels. I've got this huge monstrosity here, which to be honest, I only use on 10% power because it is ridiculously overpowered for this space, but there you go. And the problem I've been having since I moved in is the overhead room lighting, and it flickers at a really weird frequency. You know what, I'll come and pick you up. Yeah, so this overhead room lighting flickers at a really weird frequency, and it's an issue I've had since day one in this space. And to be honest, in the end, I just gave up and I just switch it off for recording videos and use all of this other lighting instead. So that's the exciting world of lighting, but perhaps this is a little bit more of interest to you. So this is my view when I'm actually recording videos. We've got the camera in front of me. I should probably turn that off, shouldn't I? Because the files are absolutely enormous on that. So that is my Sony ZV-E10, or ZV-E10 if you prefer, and that has a lovely Sigma 16mm lens on it, which I use for all of my talking headshots. I also have a second lens, this Sony Zeiss lens down here, which is a zoom lens, and I use that for all of my B-roll shots, and just gives things an ever so slight different look. And I've got it set up, as you've probably spotted, with this monitor over here. So I have a live view of whatever I'm recording, whenever I'm actually recording. And of course, I can't just stand here and stare at myself when I'm recording, but it just, I can check that things are actually framed properly and that things are kind of lit properly. And that's an incredibly useful part of the studio. And my original plan for this corner was actually to have a kind of sitting room type area. So have a bit of a sofa, maybe a plant, have this coffee table set up and have a big TV on there, you know, a big old CRT TV. And it just never really ended up happening, and I just ended up with a load of filming stuff down this end as well. Might still do that at some point. Yeah, you never know what might happen with that, but that's the explanation for the weird random 1970s coffee table anyway. Over this side, a couple of PCs that were recently featured on my channel. So there's the tiny Pentium 100 there, and the desk, the AMD Duron desk PC. And I actually use this all the time. I use it as a bridge machine. So it's got Windows Millennium Edition running on there, believe it or not. And it's just so useful for reading and writing floppy disk images and CDs and DVDs and that kind of thing. Also has USB ports. So yeah, just a really useful all-round machine, and one that I've ended up using a lot more than I expected. This side, on the other hand, is a bit of a mess, quite frankly. I've got this C-stand here, which currently is just a light holder for the light that I use to illuminate my face. I'm not quite sure what the technical term for that is in the world of filmmaking. And as you can see, there are a load of cables and things attached to this stand. The reason for that being that there's also a quick release here for a camera. And I was kind of planning on using this for overhead shots for when I'm working on stuff on the desk. Directly below, but to be honest, in the end I just ended up upgrading to a ridiculously large tripod. So this one goes up to about 2 meters tall or something, practically all the way up to the ceiling, and I actually ended up just not really using that because the camera's just sort of permanently installed on there. There are plug sockets here. All of the plug sockets, everything that's powered in this office is on Philips Hue smart plugs, so I can control all of that remotely, make sure it's all turned off nice and safely when I'm not here. And next to that, we have just a load of Atari 2600 games. I was kind of going to turn this into a bit of an extension of the backdrop and have some more nice things on display from my collection. Hence the video music made it here. But that never really ended up coming to fruition. It's just storage, like a lot of the rest of this space. Got my charging station here. We've got a couple of little panel lights and SD cards, camera batteries. That's where I charge my wireless mics and things. That's just my Bluetooth speaker that I use. I put like podcasts or music or stuff on when I'm kind of tidying up sometimes. Some other projects, the links, that should be coming up at some point on the channel in the near future. Got some mods and things to do to that. One of the many Atari 7800s that I haven't quite got around to fixing. On the shelf below that, we've got the Pentium 4, the Windows 11 Pentium 4. And the reason that is still there and in bits is because I was actually working on a part 2 of that video when I was actually upgrading that, trying to make it a bit more useful. And that was kind of put on hold as I was doing other things. But hopefully that's one that I can revisit at some point in the near future. A massive monitor, which was a very kind donation from someone who shall not be named. You know who you are. And yeah, it's a bit of a beast of burden, but I'm sure I'll find a use for that at some point. Absolute monster. There's another Atari 7800 there, which I'm sure you will no doubt understand if you've seen that video. And just down here, just kind of on that note of trying to turn this into some kind of display, there's the 5200, which I brought from home, and all the bits and pieces for that as well, which was going to be part of this display, and then ended up just getting shoved away in the corner. And finally, let's just end on a bit of a tour of my backdrop here, just some of the bits and pieces that I have on display, because some of them are here because they have a bit of sentimental value to me and connections to other things on the channel, other YouTubers, that kind of thing. So let's have a little look at what we have here. We'll start with the top shelf. This is just an old PC of mine, my old gaming PC from home. This is the S3 Verge PC, which you might recognise from an earlier video on my channel. And this is very special. This was actually the family PC that we had when I was a teenager. So it's an Athlon 650. That's never been featured on the channel. I really need to have a look at that and see what the situation is with it. Last time I booted it up, it did all work, which is great. This Atari Gem Clock was a very kind gift from a good friend of mine, Dan at Retrospective. He does actually sell these in his shop. Not sponsored or anything like that, but it is a very cool thing. He does like Amiga and Windows 3.1 versions of those as well. A couple of other bits and pieces. This is quite interesting. So this was in an Amstrad PC that I got years ago, an Amstrad PC 1512, and of course it's a hard card. What I didn't realise is that my landlord here at the studio was actually involved in the production of these hard cards. That was what his very first business did, and that is a story that I do want to tell at some point on the channel. But yeah, that is now on proud display because when I very first moved in, he came in and the first visit that he had to the studio, he said, "Oh, I don't suppose you have a hard card here, do you?" And of course I did, in one of my boxes, and yeah, he told me the story of how he used to make those for Amstrad, which is a really cool story. So moving on from that, the Acorn Electron, which is a very special computer to me because it was indeed my very first computer. And just over here in the corner, I've got the box for the Lego Atari 2600, but I don't actually have the Lego model itself because that's on proud display at home on my old shelves. Sony Mavica floppy disk camera. I want to feature this on the channel at some point. This does actually work. Next shelf down, we have this lovely Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus 2, which was part of a big donation, which was actually featured on my channel a couple of years ago now. It was a family friend of a friend who'd very sadly passed away, and his family wanted me to have his Sinclair collection. So, of course, I have a few of these on proud display. There's also a ZX81 just there, which we'll get to in a moment. Commodore 64, which was a donation to the channel. We've got this little flip video camera here. So this is kind of the OG YouTube camera, and yeah, I thought I'd buy one to make a video all about those early days of YouTube. So that's kind of to tie in with that video, and also as a bit of an homage to the people that came before me. This shelf we have the ZX81, which I mentioned before, and again we have a game child, which should hopefully need no introduction. If you know, you know. There's the RM laptop. This is a 286 laptop. I really need to get this working because it is a very lovely thing. I just need to find a power supply or a battery for that. And of course a Nintendo TV game, which was a Pong clone, which predated the Famicom. Need to do something with that at one point, but picked it up on one of the Japanese auction sites randomly, as you do. We have a collectible Atari stock certificate, which I've owned for about 20 years. That's another random purchase, but again, it's original, so a very cool thing to have. And something that's actually means quite a lot to me. This came from Clint from LGR, and he put some really interesting things on this floppy disk for me. So there's a copy of Commander Keen, which has quite an interesting save game, and there's my very own custom Cool Crab on there as well, which he made for me, and I guess quite poignant as well, given the kind of the recent news with his house and stuff. So still in touch with Clint. He's a really lovely guy, and of course he has been a big inspiration to me as well. And on this shelf, just a few little bits and pieces, odds and ends. I've got my 3DS, we've got my old original Zune, which I've had from new. Indeed, that Game Boy Advance I've also had from new. And I think my DS Lite's around here somewhere. Well, maybe it's not on this shelf, but that's the box for it anyway. And the FPGA Game Boy that I built in a second channel video a while ago. Next shelf down we have an Atari 2600 with some rather nice wireless joysticks from, I think these are from the 1970s. Really need to do something with those because they look really interesting. I don't even know if they work. I've had those for forever now. Got my Dreamcast. This is my original Dreamcast from when I was at college, and my original games, some of my friends' games that he very kindly gifted to me when he moved on to the OG Xbox, as did I. We've got an IBM Model M keyboard. That's currently broken, but I've got a few of those lying around. Some old joysticks and things, an EEPROM eraser, which I do actually use occasionally. I know this is absolutely ancient, but it does work and I do use it. My CRT that I've covered with wood grain vinyl that I take to shows and things, and of course use to demo things on the channel. We've got an Immortal joystick there. I was a Kickstart backer of that, really nice joystick. And the Atari Power Pad. And if you think this looks like a Jaguar controller, you'd be right. It was actually kind of a proto-Jaguar controller, compatible with the STE and the Falcon. Not really compatible with any games. I think there were about 4 or 5 games released that actually supported it, and therefore it is an incredibly rare piece of Atari STE history and hardware. So yeah, very pleased when I managed to pick that one up. And next to that is the Atari 2600 Plus, and I was really impressed with this thing when I reviewed it. I've done a few videos on this on my main channel and over on my second channel as well, and I just think it's a really cool project. It's a really cool kind of indication of the direction that the modern day owners of Atari are going in. Also spoke to Ben from PlayOn, who designed this thing, and I've been in touch with him about some bits and bobs. So hopefully not the last you'll be seeing of that on the channel. And tucked away behind that, I've just spotted the Microsoft Wine Guide, which I actually reviewed for a very strange Christmas special video that we did a few years ago. Maybe I should do a Christmas special again this year. And of course the Doom Shrine, my collection of Doom stuff, really. Probably a whole video in and of itself. In fact, I did actually do a video about this collection, which I will link to down in the description, as well as all of the other videos that I've mentioned in this tour so far. But got a really nice signed poster that's been signed by Adrian Carmack, Tom Hall and John Romero there. There's the original mail order version of Doom just there, which is a very rare thing, and some of the very special bits and bobs, including somewhere, although I can't actually see it at the moment, the, oh there it is, the original shareware version of Doom that we had with our very first PC way back in 1994. And finally, of course, the bottom shelf. So there's the Atari 1040 STF. This was a very early Atari ST model with a built-in floppy drive that came as part of that Sinclair collection, randomly enough, and it does work, although I have no idea what I'm going to do with that. I have quite a few Atari STs. There's a bench power supply. That's more ornamental than anything, although it does work, and I just don't really use it for anything. There is the point of sale PC, which I converted with an internal power supply and everything. covered that on the channel a couple of years ago. That's an older video now. Bought a job lot of these monitors as well, these matching branded monitors, and most of them just turned out to be e-waste, but I did manage to build a couple of working ones out of the two, if you remember that video. There's a really nice Sony tape deck. I think I just bought that at some point because I like the look of it, and my original Robo Sapien robot as well, which I've owned from new. Bought it when I was a very poor student and couldn't really afford it, and yeah, it's now a shelf ornament, quite sadly. And finally, there is this lovely ThinkPad. So this is a 365X. It's a 486. I think it's DX266 with 8 meg of RAM, something like that. And the interesting thing about this ThinkPad is that that next to it is actually the original box, and it's got all the original accessories and manuals and everything else. And it was sold as brand new in box, I think, and it, you know, first time I booted it up, it went through the initial setup wizard and things. So I was going to make a video about that, and just haven't got round to it yet. And that is the studio tour. So thank you ever so much for joining me. I know a few of you requested an updated tour when I mentioned that I'd been in here for an entire year. To be honest, I couldn't believe it myself, but there we are. As for future plans, and I know a few people had some questions about this, there are actually some interesting things happening on this site. So I mentioned when I very first moved in here that, of course, that office next door might be available to move into at some point if the channel grows to a point where I have enough money coming in to cover the cost of that, and also have the need for all the extra space. And I did maybe express an interest in potentially opening a bit of a computer museum or an arcade or something in there, which wasn't an entirely serious suggestion, but hey, you never know what might happen in the future. Also, on that note, there is another building on site here, which is currently a barn, which is being converted into offices. So that's quite interesting. I don't know if any of the current tenants of this building might end up moving into there, or if there's something in there that might be a bit more suitable for me as a studio space once that's all done, but certainly one that I'm keeping an eye on. And at the minute, they're actually building another barn next to that one, so they can move all of the old junk and stuff that's in the current barn into the new barn. And I've actually been told by the landlord that there is quite a lot of old computer stuff in there that kind of relates to some of his previous IT businesses and stuff. So when the opportunity comes, I may indeed go in there and have a bit of a poke around and see what he has. But of course, that's the future, and what we're actually here to do in this video is to celebrate the past 12 months here in the studio. So I have to say this is easily one of the best moves I've ever made. It's made life so much easier just for the YouTube channel. I think the quality of the stuff that I've been able to put out has massively improved over the past 12 months, just thanks to having a dedicated space like this. And the workflow means that I can produce a lot more of it as well. So I am incredibly grateful to my landlord, who has insisted on not being named or featured in this video, so I will stick to that. And of course, I'm also, when I thank all of my supporters at the end of every single video, that is incredibly heartfelt and genuine, because if it wasn't for the money coming in for them, I never would have made this move in the first place, because that's the money that covers the rent on this studio. So thank you ever so much to my supporters on Patreon, Coffee, and indeed my YouTube channel members for making all of this possible. And thank you to you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different video for my channel, and normal service shall hopefully resume next week.